Section 7. Thinking. Introduction. This study session focuses on the role of thinking in the learning process. We shall examine how the thinking capacity of man contributes immensely to his learning process. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to discuss the relationship between the concept of learning and thinking, and highlight the tools of thoughts. The thinking process. The Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary defines thinking as the act of 1. Exercising the mind in order to form opinions and come to conclusions. 2. To imagine. 3. To form a conception of. 4. To reflect, recall, or to consider. Thinking, therefore, overlaps with other mental activities. Thinking can be defined as a specific behavior which entails an individual using symbolic representations of events and objects and manipulating ideas, images, or concepts. Thinking is implicit, that is, it cannot be observed directly, but must be inferred from its products, knowledge, remembering, skills, abilities, and intentions, and so on. The word thinking commonly refers to two broad classes of symbolic activities. A. Associative or non-directed thinking. Here, the flow of symbolic activity is not controlled or manipulated for an explicit purpose. This includes daydreaming, free association, autistic thinking, delusions, hallucinations, and the likes. B. Directed thinking. This is the phenomenon that most psychologists identify and study as proper thinking. This exercise includes problem solving, concept learning, verbal learning, imagery or imagination, creativity, memory encoding, insights, computer simulation, and cybernetics. Tools of thought. Thinking always involves the manipulation of mental symbols representative of external reality and may have a more or less directed problem-solving character. Winefield and Pear, 1981. The material of thought may consist of verbal or non-verbal images, symbols, and concepts. Images. An image is a sensory experience, not based on immediate sense data, a recreation in the mind's eye, or mental representation of a perceptual event. Images form the basic tool of cognitive function. They help us to classify and describe new experiences through the process of matching with past ones. They form the basis of memory, and they may at times be evoked or recalled purely for the pleasure that results, as in poetry appreciation. Images commonly have emotional associations. Smells in particular evoke the past. Body image. Our cognitive representation of our physical self has very powerful emotional meaning. Discrepancies between this image and reality are common during self-conscious adolescence, after physical trauma such as amputation and phantom limb experiences, and in cases of both obesity and extreme thinness. such as anorexia. This is loss of appetite, not extreme thinness. We have cultural ideals for a body for either sex. We learn social conventions regarding who may touch different parts of the body. All these have obvious relevance to the clinical encounter. Symbols. Symbols constitute other tools of thought. Symbols stand for something other than themselves. They are related more indirectly than are images. For example, a given color will symbolize different emotions in different cultures. For example, a given color will symbolize different emotions in different cultures. Green in the hospital setting is seen as being relaxing. Some people see the color as jealousy. Concepts. Concepts constitute vital tools of thought. A concept stands for a class of objects or events with some attributes in common. Concepts vary in their level of abstraction, that is, being able to separate objects and events from what is real or concrete. Think of these attributes separately from facts. Objects or particular examples. Experiments on how adults learn new concepts reveal that discovering and using concepts involves complex thinking. The subject may be shown a series of geometric forms that vary in shape, color, and size. The experimenter may have decided that all large red forms are members of a newly invented concept, BEP. The subject task is to discover the properties of BEP. Forms are represented one at a time, and the subject guesses whether each is a BEP. The experimenter tells him or her whether the choice made is correct. This allows the subject to generate hypotheses about relevant dimensions. For example, color red. When he or she comes across a figure that fits his or her hypothesis, but not the experimental's definition. For example, a small red figure. He or she abandons the current hypothesis and generates a new one, like large red figure. The more defining properties there are, the longer it takes to learn concepts. A concept that is defined by large red and square is harder to spot than one defined by only large and red. The ability to form and use abstraction, a higher order concept, in a logical and flexible way, is a valued cognitive skill, which develops gradually through experience. It is vulnerable to the effects of brain damage and mental illness. At the earliest, it is completed only at the end of primary school. Anyone who wishes to communicate with children, or those who seek to understand brain function at different ages, needs to understand the stages of conceptual development. Conceptual development. Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist, drew attention to the mechanisms by which children develop logical concepts and learn to understand the world. Piaget regards thinking as a specific instance of adaptive behavior, of coping with the environment and organizing or reorganizing thoughts and action. Adaptation begins with the random, diffuse, mass reflexes of the neonate state and progresses by stages to the formal logical reasoning of adulthood. According to Piaget, the growth of adaptation always involves two complementary processes, namely assimilation and accommodation. In assimilation, a child incorporates and utilizes stimuli from the environment, interpreting new situations in terms of familiar ones, fitting the unfamiliar into his available organization, and reacting as he has in past situations. Accommodation occurs when environmental stimuli demand new reaction in familiar situation. That is, when learned responses are no longer adequate and the child must accommodate to the situation by changing his behavior. Piaget identified three major stages of conceptual development, namely sensory motor operations, concrete operations, and formal operations. Several phases can be identified for each stage. Stage 1. Sensory motor operations. The first stage extends from 0 months to 2 years and has 6 identifiable phases. Phase 1. Exercises of reflexes at 1 month. Phase 2. Coordination of reflexes and responses from 1 month to the 4th month, involving hand movements and eye movements, reaching for objects, groups, and sucks them. Phase 3. Anticipate events and intentionally repeat responses that produce results. Looks for objects from the 4th month to 8th month. Phase 4. Differentiate means from ends, using established responses to attain goals. Before this time, babies behave as though out of sight is out of mind is the guiding rule. If a toy is hidden, interest in it at once disappears. Fading images of mother's face cause no alarm. However, by 6 months, they cause distress. Babies will start to search for hidden toys, remove obstacles, and so on. 9 months to 10th month. Phase 5. Experimentation, exploration, variation, and modification of behavior. Curiosity appears. Baby tries things out by banging, shaking, and dropping. 11 to 12 months. Phase 6. Emergence of capacity to respond to, think about objects and events that are not immediately observable, and to invent new means of accomplishing goals. Child demonstrates the beginning of symbolic activity by deferred imitation and the first words of speech. Stage 2. Concrete operations. This stage has 3 identifiable phases, extending from around 18 months to 2 years to 11 to 12 years. Phase 1. Preconceptual stage, 2 to 4 years. A child begins to regard stimuli as representative of other objects, uses a chair as a boss, and so on. Phase 2. Period of initiative thoughts, ages 4 to 7. A child at this stage can conceptualize more, construct more complex thoughts and images, and group objects into classes. However, a change in form necessarily produces a change in amount. Therefore, thinking lacks reversibility, that is, the ability to mentally undo an action and imagine the result. The child lacks the concept of conservation, that quantity remains constant despite changes in appearance. For example, for a child, liquid poured into a taller glass has become more than it was when in a wider glass. Therefore, the pre-operational child thinks in a way which is qualitatively different from an older person. The thinking is relatively pre-logical, intuitive, and even magical. For example, the understanding of the concept of death in children. Phase 3. Concrete operation, ages 7 to 11. The child gradually acquires conversational concepts and is no longer deceived by how things look. He uses logic and reasoning in an elementary way, but he applies them only in the manipulation of concrete objects, not of verbal manipulations. He can order a series of dolls or sticks, but not. For instance, E is taller than S. E is shorter than L. Who is tallest? This requires formal operation. Stage 3. Formal operations. The final stage begins early in adolescence, from 11 to 14 years onwards. This is a truly scientific hypothesis testing, what if stage, that is able to consider alternative hypothetical possibilities and not constrained by available choices. He can consider general laws, reason deductively, make hypotheses, and keep many variables in mind. Solution comes little by little. The sequence described above appears without a lot of variation in children of different nationalities, social classes, and intelligence. However, the chronological age may vary as demonstrated by Soviet researchers. Study session summary. In this study session, we have focused on the thinking process, a veritable tool in the learning exercise. In the discussion, we define the concept of thinking, examine the tools of thought, and also dilated on the 3 stages of conceptual development. End of study session 7. Thank you for listening.